Here we go. It's 12:15. Great. Hello, everyone. I see that we've got 16, now 17 participants already registered. That's wonderful. Welcome to the our virtual admitted student day panel on experiential learning and career opportunities. I appreciate you giving us this midday part of your town or midday part of your day to join us. It started off as a great day here in Salt Lake, but actually it started snow flurries. So my background and Professor Carpenter's background are really apropos for today. Joining us today in the Experiential Learning and Career Opportunities panel are two faculty members and the Assistant Dean for our Career Development Office. If you have the same screen view that I have, I'm in the center. My name is Reyes Aguilar. I'm the Associate Dean for Admissions and Financial Aid here at the University of Utah's Quinney College of Law. To my right on the screen is Anna Carpenter, the Director for our Clinical and Experiential Programming. To my left is the Assistant Dean for our Career Development Office, Arturo Thompson. And below me is Matt Tokson, Professor of Law here, who is representing our Committee on Judicial Clerkships. Today's panel, if I could give a little bit of a roadmap, I will be asking all the panelists to introduce themselves and give a little background on their experience as well as the role of their offices. After the introductions, I'll open it up to question and answer. So for those of you who do have questions, feel free to start loading them into the question and answer box. You can get to that from the lower end of the screen. I do also have asked our Assistant Director for Admissions and Assistant Director for the Career Development Office to join as participants. Isabel Moreno is the Associate Director for Admissions, and Jacqueline Howell is the Associate Director for the Career Development Office. If you guys want to have a chat question with them, they will be participating on the Zoom chat. For the question and answers, we've also activated an option so that you can upvote questions so that your preferred question to be asked earlier will be moved up in the question and answer box that is on my screen. And so with that, let me go ahead and start with the introduction of Assistant Dean Thompson.
Hi there, everyone. Nice to meet you all, and hopefully at some point in the near future we'll get to do that in person. My name is Arturo Thompson. I am a former practicing lawyer, and before that I had over a decade in marketing and communications with some big companies nationally. About 9 years ago, I started doing this kind of work at another institution, and then recently joined the University of Utah's Quinney College of Law. It's truly an extraordinary institution, and we'll get into more details obviously about my office as we go forward. But thank you all for making it. And outside of this conference, if you have further questions, don't hesitate to reach out to myself, Jacqueline, or anyone else in my office. Anna, do you want to go?
I'm sorry, Reyes. I didn't know if you wanted to. If you wanted to jump in, Reyes, I apologize. Hi, everybody. My name is Anna Carpenter. I'm the Director of Clinical Programs here at the law school, which means that I have administrative responsibility for overseeing our in-house clinics and our externship opportunities. And wearing my teaching hat, I direct a clinic called the Justice Lab, which is a clinic where students, basically as all of you probably know, since you've looked at clinical opportunities at other schools, a clinic is essentially a mini law firm inside the law school where students learn how to practice law by representing real clients. Reyes asked us to speak a little bit about our teaching or programming or office philosophy. And I wanted to say that for myself and my colleagues who I work with in experiential learning, we take very seriously the philosophy of meeting each student where they are. And that is something that for me applies to my teaching in the clinic and also my approach to advising students on their curricular paths. So I'm interested in learning about students' goals, their interests, and helping each individual student think through what it is that you want to learn and how we can support you to do that. And I think I'll close with that and turn it over to Matt.
Thanks. Excuse me. My name is Matthew Thompson. I teach criminal law and criminal procedure, as well as cyber law and privacy here. Why I'm on the panel, I'm part of the Judicial Clerkship Committee. We help sort of link students to judicial clerkship opportunities, which I'll talk about a little bit more in detail. But basically, they're jobs where you are doing work for a judge, research work, even helping to draft opinions. And they're some of the most sought after sort of 1-year experiences that people can have post-law school. So we have a very active clerkship committee here, and people clerk at sort of all levels of the judiciary. I myself clerked at the DC Circuit, and then at the Supreme Court for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, one of the most wonderful experiences of my career. So I'm here to talk about that for the most part. I think that more or less covers it. There are other things I could talk about regarding myself, but I think that's the meat of what I'll be discussing today.
Great, thank you, Matt. Anna, the first question is actually going to your area of responsibility. It's from one of our admitted students, Victoria Countryman. The question is, how many clinics are there? What are they? And when can or how do students join one?
So we have 2 in-house clinics at SJQ. The first I'll talk about is the Innocence Clinic. It is a clinic where students participate usually in their 2L year, although it's an opportunity that third-year law students can participate in as well. It's a year-long clinic where students work with an organization called the Rocky Mountain Innocence Center and 2 law school faculty to pursue claims of innocence for incarcerated individuals. The other clinical opportunity is my clinic, the Justice Lab. The Justice Lab is a clinic where students represent client organizations, usually community groups and nonprofits, in systemic advocacy and policy reform work. And for both, that's a 1-semester clinic. For both of those opportunities, they're available to 2Ls and 3Ls. And we hold recruitment and application processes in the spring of every year for the next academic year. So when you're a 1L here, you would want to start keeping your eyes open for emails and information sessions about opportunities in your second year. So we let students know about that in the spring. And I think that covers it.
Anna, I'd like to have you follow up on that a little bit with 2 questions that I have in my mind. What's the difference between the clinics and the opportunities that students have in those 2 in-house areas and the externship programming we have and some of the placements associated with that? And are both clinics and externships available during the summers?
Great question. So I'll start with just a quick, I'll do a sort of breakdown of experiential education writ large, because that might be helpful for folks. So we have, at all law schools, have a requirement that students get at least 6 credits before they graduate of what's called experiential education or experiential learning. And at most law schools and at ours, those fall generally into 3 buckets: clinics, externships, and simulations. And I can talk about each of those in turn. So in a clinic, you are working in a law firm that is part of the law school, where your teacher in the classroom and your supervisor, your supervising attorney, in your legal work is a member of our faculty. So you're being taught in the classroom, learning skills and how to practice and practicing your lawyering performances with a faculty member. And that faculty member is also the lawyer whose bar license you're practicing under. And in an externship, you're you're working in the community at a legal aid office or a district attorney's office or even a law firm or in a judge's chambers. where your attorney supervisor or your judge supervisor is someone in the community, and you're getting credit for the hours that you work at your externship placement. And then you're taking an you're taking a required course in the classroom here at the law school that supports your learning and professional development in the context of your externship placement. And in a simulation, you're taking a classroom course where you are working with simulated facts to practice some sort of legal skill. So we have courses like trial advocacy, contract drafting, we have a counterterrorism simulation. So that's sort of the full range of experiential opportunities at the law school.
Great, thanks, Anna. I know Professor Yora, who teaches the counterterrorism simulation, would like for me to plug that that's actually going on tomorrow, and you can log into that and observe it from our website. Next question actually goes to for federal clerkships. Matt, I have a question from Alyssa Campbell, who's saying, have alumni received federal clerkships, and would this be available after graduation? I'm going to throw my own little question implicit in that. I knew nothing about what a judicial clerkship was when I started, when I was looking at law schools. So can you also include in your answer a little bit of the traditional track that people follow in getting judicial clerkships?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, I don't think people outside of law school know, or at least for the most part, people don't know sort of anything about clerkships. And so that's perfectly normal if that's the situation people are in. So let me just start with that, right? So the traditional way the process works. So people mentioned externships, which are generally either during the school year or during the summer, sort of like an internship program type thing where you work in the judge's chambers, generally sort of under the clerks and help and assist them and things like that. And there's been a wide variety of externships, non-judicial externships that people work in. But so whether or not you do a judicial externship or not, the clerkship is typically something you apply for in your second year, or your third year. And then you would do it oftentimes, traditionally, immediately out of law school for a year. You do the clerkship, you get that experience, which I'll talk about some more as we go along. But then you and then you join a firm or go into public service or whatever it is that you're doing. So that's sort of the traditional track. As this sort of question brings up, sometimes increasingly, I think people will sometimes do their clerkship not immediately out of law school, but even a few years down the road. That's become increasingly common. I think judges like the people with experience and things like that. So both tracks are open and fairly common. We certainly encourage people to apply at the traditional time, and that's when most clerkships are getting filled. But people do clerkships, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years after they've been in practice. That's become increasingly a thing. But that's sort of the traditional. That's sort of a very broad overview of the clerkship application process.
I was having trouble unmuting. Thanks, Matt. The question also included, have we ever had alumni who are federal court clerks? And the answer to that is yes, and we very regularly have. In particular, with regard to the federal appellate court system, the circuit court and the U.S. Supreme Court, those are highly competitive positions. But we have had students regularly serve on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in particular, but we have had U.S. Supreme Court clerks. Our most recent is one of our graduates named Tyler Green, who also teaches I believe the federal courts class as an adjunct on occasion. And so that's our most recent U.S. Supreme Court clerk who has graduated from our program. The next question is directed toward you, Arturo. Says, what career services are available during law school that help us receive internships, externships, and then other jobs after graduation?
So part of that is, as you're thinking about the Career Development Office, is that we work in close coordination with both the extern internship program and field placements and with the Judicial Clerkship Committee. And that's because it's all integrated, which I think is really important for you as a student when you come here, that it is seamless amongst us, so that if you come into my office and you're interested in something which is in fact an externship, we can help to advise you and then hand you off to Professor Carpenter and her group. Likewise, if you want to do judicial clerkships, I serve on that committee as well. And we work jointly in setting up programming and reaching out to judges and in helping you prepare your materials for those opportunities. So as you're thinking about law school when you arrive, you will start having an engagement with our office the moment you're on campus, right? We're going to catch you in the hallways. We're going to introduce ourselves. My office, when we are in non-cyber mode of law school, is also the place where all the candy is located, and so that's a big draw, frankly, because sometimes you just need a little bit of sugar. But you come in, we have an open door policy, and we want to engage with you, right? And we're going to put you into a process that's pretty intense, and we think that that's a win. Our real focus and our culture is built around a one-to-one engagement with every single student. One of the great advantages of the College of Law is because we have a small population, we get to know every single one of you, and we can spend multiple hours with every single one of you. I suppose that could be a downside because we're tracking you down in the hallway sometimes to check in on you. But really, law school is tough, right? And it should be, and it'll be one of the hardest things you've ever done. And so one of the great things to have at a place like SJQ is not just the community of the students you're in, your amazing faculty in those programs, but a CDO that supports you seamlessly with them. And then, in terms of careers, we will help you identify summer opportunities. We will help you identify long-term opportunities. And because of the intensity of that approach, it's very much customized to you. So no matter what your practice area interest is, no matter the kind of work that you want to do, you may want to practice law in the traditional sense, or you may want to do something else. And it may be in Utah, it may be in the Mountain West, it may be anywhere in the US, or it may be overseas. And we have the skill set, the expertise, and the experience to help you land those opportunities.
Thanks, Arturo. I have my own follow-up. I'm going to just show how ignorant I was as I was getting ready to enter law school, but I wasn't sure of how they named or what they referred to the jobs that occur or are available for students during the summers. And what I got confused with when I started law school is people referred to clerkships, and sometimes I wasn't sure whether they were talking about judicial clerkships or summer clerkships, and then I heard summer associates, things like that. So because the question included the words internship and externship,
Sure.
Can you kind of give us the nomenclature?
Yeah, and here's one of the things too, right? If you're talking to other schools, looking at other schools, the nomenclature changes a little bit. We don't always use the same words to mean the same things. But in general, it certainly, I think at SJQ, and I'm going to look at Professor Carpenter here if I get it wrong, but we sort of refer to, when we say an externship, that means it's an opportunity outside of the law school for which you will receive credit, which means you're probably not being paid. An internship could have several meanings, but let's just use this meaning that an internship is a volunteer opportunity. So for whatever reason, you don't want to receive credit or it doesn't fit for that, but you're getting experience. And then there are paid opportunities. The word clerkship is also a little tricky, right? There are judicial clerkships, and those are sort of the capital C of clerkships, right? And those are post-law school. And then there are summer internships with judges. Some judges you will find don't like to call them clerkships because it gets confusing for them too, because you're a summer intern and not a clerk, or you're a summer extern and not a clerk. And then if you go to a law firm, those are oftentimes called clerkships again, which makes it a little confusing. But usually, oftentimes the sort of parallel phrase for that is a summer associate. And then there are opportunities, right? Again, going back to this idea that law is more, or the JD and law school is more than just the practice of law. There are summer opportunities to intern, again, using that word, but in a new context, at corporations or at other kinds of entities that sort of think about it a whole different way, because it's not necessarily that you have to be a law student to do them, although they really love to get law students in. So I may have made it more confusing and not less confusing, but what you can rely on, I think, if you come, you tell us what your ambitions are, what you want to do, and we'll help you figure that out, be it an externship, an internship, a summer associate placement, an internship with a judge, a judicial clerkship, whatever it may be.
Great, thank you, Arturo. I'm going to first pitch this question to Professor Toxin, but then have you follow up, Arturo, on this because I think both your perspectives are important. It's basically, would a clerkship be a valuable experience regardless of practice area? And would they be particularly important for certain areas? And if so, which?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think that clerkships are valuable for folks in every sort of practice area and practice style. I would say that they are likely more valuable for people, who are going to go into litigation where you're going to be in court. I mean, for folks who are doing transactional law, which, I mean, for people who haven't been to law school yet may not know this distinction between litigation and transactional law, so maybe I should talk about that a bit. But transactional law meaning like drafting contracts, helping to facilitate business transactions, mergers. There's just a whole wide body of compliance, all kinds of stuff, where you're not necessarily, not all law, in other words, is in courtrooms, litigating cases. So if you're doing that sort of law, a courtship is still useful, and they're quite prestigious. So it's always sort of helpful to you there. But I think it's fair to say that for folks doing litigation, which is also covers a huge swath of things, where things are getting filed in court and things like that. That's where clerkships are particularly useful, in part because you get to see sort of behind the scenes how cases are getting decided. You get a sense of what judges look for, and it's more directly relevant. But I do think they're useful, and certainly people who are going into transactional law and are sort of 100% sure that that's what they want to do, still do clerkships and get a lot of benefit out of that.
Yeah, I'll actually, that's what Professor Toxin said is spot on. And I want to emphasize, and as he did, that while it tends to be more directly applicable if you're going to be a litigator. Even for transactional lawyers, you learn how to write better. You learn how to think about a contract and how it gets broken, which is what litigators do in many cases, or arguing over whether or not it's broken. And that gives you an insight that helps you support your clients in a great way. Everyone I know who's ever clerked speaks about it as being one of, if not the greatest professional experience of their entire life, no matter what they've done in the rest of their career. It is extraordinarily prestigious to have on your resume, and it can open doors no matter what your practice is going to be. So I'm a huge, immense fan of clerkships at the federal, state, local, all levels. Will help you move forward in your career in really extraordinary ways. And maybe 80% of all law careers are sort of litigation, sort of transactional. There's also this 10 or 15, 20% that are sort of these weird other spaces that often combine the two, like bankruptcy and restructuring work. And those give you opportunities to be sort of a transactional lawyer who shows up in the courtroom, or a courtroom lawyer who's still doing transactions. And so it's a whole meld of things.
Yeah, and just to jump in on that. So I think it's an important point that Arturo made, that clerkships are sort of, in addition to the career benefits, they're sort of a value in and of themselves, right? It's a wonderful experience. People typically think of them as, some of the most interesting, compelling legal work. It can be, some of my best friends were people I met during my clerkship year, people I still, talk to regularly. And so just the experience, I talk to my judges regularly. Just the experience of a clerkship is another good reason to do it, because it's often a very rewarding experience. I think, I'd encourage you to talk to lawyers who've clerked, and it's virtually everyone will tell you, it was one of the best years of my career, and some of the most interesting work that I've done. So that's a great point.
Thanks, guys. Next question is to Professor Carpenter. Actually, but all of you can chime in. I think it's relevant to all of you. But the question is, what do students typically do over the summer? Is there a requirement for students to take part in externships or other experiences?
So from the experiential side, there's absolutely no requirement that you do anything experiential in your summer. You can do with your summer what you will, whether that's getting a paying job or taking an internship or clerkship that's not for credit. We do not offer our in-house clinics over the summer. However, any student who wants to essentially can take part in an externship during the summer months, and that's entirely up to you.
Arturo, do you want to chime in on that as it relates either to the traditional paid jobs that some students do, or maybe somebody strategize about their experiential opportunities in first year looking toward their second year summer?
Yeah, so one of the things, right, so the conversation you will have with us in your first semester is talking about what your ambitions are, what are your interests, what do you want to do? And so we may help to say, hey, there's this great, maybe you should consider this clinical or this experiential opportunity. Maybe there's this paid opportunity, but to sort of build a pattern and a structure to that, right? So jobs are an amazing thing. And whether it's a job in the sense of I'm out getting paid at a private firm or a company, or it's a job in the sense of you're within a clinic, you're representing clients, you're getting real material experience. It goes on your resume. It will help you understand, is this really what I want to do? Is there some other area I want to explore? We build on that year on year. And then the other thing to keep in mind too is that there are other opportunities, right? You may come and decide for the summer, yeah, I want to work part-time, but I want to take this particular class, right? Or I want to sort of adjust my schedule in a way, and that's another great set of opportunities. And so it really comes down to understanding you as an individual. And for all the people who are on this panel and everyone else who's in the administration and in the faculty, you know, they are deeply committed and interested in working with you to understand what your interests are. So whatever you want to do in the summer, we'll figure that out, and we will work with you directly in accomplishing that. And if there's a requirement, we'll be aware of that, usually related to work that there isn't. There's not a requirement, but for example, you may go to a jurisdiction, right? Let's say you want to go to New York, and there was also a question that popped up I saw about placement outside of the state, and I'm happy to talk about that in a second. But let's say you want to go to New York. New York has a very specific requirement to be a member of their bar that you have to have certain pro bono hours. We will work with you within the school to help you accomplish those pro bono hours. And part of the advising that my office will give you say, oh, you're going to New York, have you done these pro bono hours, right? So that you're thinking about those as well. And those may be much more compact experiences, right? It wouldn't be, say, a summer or a semester, but you might go and spend a few hours on this project or a few hours on that project. Those things will really help you moving forward.
I want to chime in a little bit with regard to the phrase that Alexa used in her question about some truly unique opportunities. I think one of the things that really makes the opportunity to attend law school at the University of Utah unique is our location. By virtue of being a state capital, a county seat, and a federal seat for courts and agencies, major law firms, the opportunities that are presented to you during the summer, by virtue of those things, if you're not going to law school in a place that happens to have all those opportunities or those statuses, you'll have to move away for the summer to take advantage of that. And so, for example, even among major cities, Salt Lake is unique in having a U.S. Securities and Exchange Office, and we have students who regularly have opportunities there. Then there's the federal court system, the U.S. District Court. We have chambers for the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit, and then all level of courts at the state court system. And going to what Professor Toxin mentioned, it's truly a unique opportunity, I think, as a law student to sit in the chambers of a judge and hear from her observations on the writing that's been presented to her office, or the civility or lack of, and how that's maybe impacting the case that's before her, or some just really good lawyering. And to have that as part of your educational process before you go off and do another, say, externship with the Criminal Defense Office or the Salt Lake District County Attorney's Office, and the skills and the experience you can get as it relates to that next step of your education, is unique by virtue of what we have to offer in our location.
Can I add on to that, Reyes?
Sure.
So one of the other great things, right? So all the things Reyes said, because the Salt Lake City has all of those resources available. You know, do you think a little more broadly about the region? This is also a real hub of innovation nationally and globally. So there's an area here called Silicon Slopes, which is sort of the local version of Silicon Valley. Some of the biggest tech companies in the world have offices there. There are startups that are flying, that are launching here and you know, flying out forward on their careers, or rather on their funding and getting funded and growing. And so it's an extraordinary space, not only in terms of government and traditional law firm, but in terms of the kinds of corporations, which means that if you're at, say, a firm, you may be working with eBay that has an office in this area, or Adobe that has an office in this area, or you may be working at eBay or Adobe. The head of litigation for Americas at eBay, for example, is one of our graduates, and her office is in the facility here in Utah. And so those sets of opportunities are pretty extraordinary, not to mention the fact that, you know, you're 45 minutes from some of the best skiing in the world and beautiful hiking and all the other wonderful things. That's a pretty rare mix to get.
Can I jump in for a quick sec on that?
Sure.
I see a couple questions in the, that I think relate to this, and I'll sort of just add an externship angle. So one of the questions that's in the queue is, are there any placements in the nuclear regulatory space? Which reveals my complete lack of understanding of anything related to nuclear regulation. I study civil courts for a living and teach a clinic. So but it raises for me, and it raises a thought for me that relates to this conversation we're having, which is about sort of the nature of the opportunities that are available to students. And when it comes to our externship placements, we have a lot of fixed placements that have been in place for a long time, or that have historically accepted students. But the bottom line is, whatever it is that you are interested in doing, and I think this is very similar to the philosophy in Arturo's office in career services, that if you are interested in pursuing an externship in a particular area, in a particular office, we will help you find that opportunity and create that opportunity for you, and create a new externship placement that meets your needs. And that goes back to sort of that philosophy of a sort of individualized approach. So we have fixed opportunities, but the sky is the limit. And that includes externships in other cities. We have the possibility, if you would like to save up all of your externship credits, which are capped at 14, you could spend an entire semester, say your last semester, working in Washington, D.C. or in another country. We have students who do international placements. And so there's just a lot of possibility in terms of what you can do based on your interests.
And as a sub part of that question, they also ask about energy regulation. That ties a bit into our Wallace Stegner Center for Environmental and Studies, and there are opportunities within that. Those two categories, energy regulation and nuclear, would fall under both the environmental law category as well as natural resources in terms of energy regulation, and as you deal with extractive industries such as oil, gas, mining, things of that nature. I don't know if Arturo wants to add on to anything about.
Yeah, and I'll just say, so specific to nuclear, right? It's sort of the straw man we're talking about at this moment. So I coincidentally have had a student who's gone to work for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I think that's the right designation. And that was someone who was deeply interested in that. I've had someone who, you know, this just to give you sort of a sense of array of these kinds of opportunities. We've had people, students I've worked with in the past, in my experience, who work at the State Department. There are people who work at big corporations. A weird one, the Dairy Council of America, right, which would not seem to be the most intriguing, but they actually do a lot of international law because they're doing import-export all the time, right? They're representing every dairy farmer in America. So, I think whatever your interest is, however narrow, however specific, however unique, again, the combined knowledge of the people at the school and the connections we have, as well as your ambition, right? Like it's not like you're not going to be doing part of the lifting here, but we'll figure that out and we'll find those opportunities.
Great, thanks. Professor Toxin, next question is for you. It's from Jake Bandis, and he said, is a state clerkship only helpful in the state where you plan to practice, or can it be as valuable as a federal one, just not the same wow factor?
Yes, I hate to dispense my wisdom with the mute button on, but so it's a good question. So clerkships in other states are going to be valuable, and we often encourage people to apply to the states surrounding Utah, as well as other states if they're interested in part because a lot of times there are valuable state clerkships like state Supreme Court clerkships, particularly are prestigious, have a good deal of wow factor, and maybe particularly judges from say Idaho or Nevada or whoever, where S.J. Quinney students, and S.J. Quinney as a law school is going to be better than the law schools in their states. They are particularly good targets for people who are geographically flexible to get, say, a state Supreme Court clerkship. And so, to me, that's a good opportunity to get any state Supreme Court clerkship or even state Court of Appeals clerkship is prestigious, but particularly state Supreme Court. And that's something that we encourage people to target if they're flexible geographically, because it is quite useful. And any clerkship anywhere, I think, is useful on the resume, useful in standing out, at a law firm. So I think that is a valuable thing to start thinking about, like what other states might I be willing to spend a year in, because you can get some great clerkships that I think we're particularly well positioned to send students to. And then there's the Utah clerkships, which we are all over, basically. We make up a good portion of the Utah State Supreme Court and Court of Appeals clerkships as well.
I think the wow factor or the hierarchy in how either firms or hiring partners as individuals look at the listing in a person's resume as to whether they've done the most prestigious clerkship you can possibly do, which is basically one on the United States Supreme Court, and then cascading down from that, would play into how effective can it be in opening doors for interview opportunities and things of that nature. I think one of the very important things to have in mind, though, is as an experience in training you for the practice, if you have a sincere commitment to the idea of doing trial level practice, especially at the criminal law area, a state trial court or a state justice court, quite frankly, position may prove just as valuable in learning and observing trial tactics, finding out, what is this thing called good lawyering and advocacy, and speaking either before a jury versus speaking to the court or making your arguments to the bench. Those kinds of clerkship opportunities can be invaluable if that is the trajectory you want to begin your career on as a trial practitioner. Any thoughts on that, Arturo?
Yeah, I want to add to that. So one of the, so I was a practicing attorney, did this for many, many years, and I will tell you that firms, so the kind of experience that Professor Toxin had, right? It's an extraordinary experience to clerk at the DC Circuit, which is just behind the Supreme Court as the most prestigious place, and then to go to, on the Supreme Court as well. But when you think about state court clerkships, they can be incredibly important and valuable in a number of ways. Certainly, I think is sort of the question suggested within the state where that court sits, right? So if it's in Utah, the Utah Court of Appeals, Supreme Court, Colorado, if you want to practice Colorado, it helps because in most states, the law is made at the state Court of Appeals, right? I mean, there are cases that happen in federal courts, but most cases in states are not happening in federal courts, they're happening in state courts. That's where and these are complex, very nuanced, very sophisticated issues. And not only will you get experience working with judges who were brilliant attorneys, they're well connected, so it can open up doors because they can personally make a call on your behalf and say this person should be hired. I know of judges who have reputations as being the toughest on developing really good writers. And at least one state I know, it's a Court of Appeals judge. He's not on the federal bench. And all the federal judges know, by the way, and love to hire his clerks as soon as they rotate off his bench into the federal opportunities. So you have those, but I also think going cross-state, if you're at a firm, because I have a lot of relationships with firms and I spend a lot of time talking to them, for firms, knowing that you had that sort of day-to-day experience in a Court of Appeals or even at the trial level is a huge win for them, because as a first-year associate, you know so little and you have to learn so much about the actual day-to-day practice. To have learned that in a courtroom means that you get an immense jump start. So I think across the board it's helpful. There are differences, but they may not quite be the differences you imagine.
Great. Do you have
Yeah,
anything to add to
I just
that,
I agree with everything that Reyes and Arturo just said. That's all I have to say.
Great. How about you, Anna? Anything to add to that?
I don't think I have anything to add to that, no.
Okay. The next question for you, Anna, or I'm going to have this next question for you. It's the second one on our list. But Caitlin Atten asks, what are some of the projects or organizations that the Justice Lab is partnering or has partnered with, or who expects to partner with in the future?
Okay, great. So this reveals some deep cuts on my my context. So I am actually new to the University of Utah College of Law. I've been here for this academic year, and I'm teaching my clinic, the Justice Lab, here for the first time in the fall of 2020. But I have been teaching in this clinic model for more than a decade at two other law schools prior to this, so I can speak a little bit about what those clinics' work looked like and what I expect it to look like here. So in the model that I use, I reach out to organizations in the community and ask them essentially, is there a legal or policy problem that your organization needs help with that you think a group of smart law students could move the ball forward on in the course of a semester? And then I work with those client organizations to craft a project that I think is achievable within the course of a semester for a team of students. So I'll give you a super concrete example of the kind of work that my clinic students have done and will do. I previously taught in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And when I first moved there about 7 years ago, I had a group of community organizations reach out to me and say, hey, we think that the Tulsa County Jail and the Tulsa County Court are putting people in jail, incarcerating them for not paying debt that's related to a criminal conviction, sort of administrative debt, court costs and fees related to a criminal conviction. And so I had a group of students tackle this issue that no one in Oklahoma had ever worked on before at that time. And they talked to judges at the court, they talked to folks at the jail, they talked to folks across the community, gathered information, and essentially did an investigation to find out what was going on, and wrote a report that they issued at the end of the semester that revealed that, in fact, the Tulsa County Jail and the Tulsa County Court were incarcerating people for not paying debt related to criminal court costs, which it turns out is actually unconstitutional based on a Supreme Court case from the early 80s. And so those students sort of, what they did, the way that I think about it, and this is one of the things that I really love to see students do and hope to see them do in the Justice Lab, is to take a problem that exists, an injustice in the community, and to make that problem real. And by law students doing an intensive investigation and gathering the facts and marshaling the legal and policy pieces of a given problem and connecting that with the practical reality on the ground, and then writing a report about it or creating some sort of document that makes it real and gives it a name, we can then hand off that information to community organizations to do further advocacy on it. And that's exactly what we saw happen in Oklahoma. So the students' work sort of launched a much larger and longer advocacy campaign that a lot of organizations became involved in and are still working on, and that has resulted in policy change in this area in Oklahoma. And so that's the kind of really powerful community-based work that I anticipate students working on in the Justice Lab. In the past, I've worked on issues ranging from mental health to domestic violence to workforce development. I even once represented a fire department who, it turns out, firefighters are these incredible first responders who have really, really deep ties to the most vulnerable and poorest members of any community, and actually end up providing a lot of social services for them. And we help them sort of restructure their first responder program for really vulnerable people. So that's just a little bit of a sampling of what I anticipate the Justice Lab will be doing.
Great. I'm going to throw the next question to you, but I'm also going to include in it an experience a student had that I believe she worked with you on, Amity Flores's visit to South Texas and the detention center. I think this is a really great example of being at a school that has the kind of student to faculty ratio we have, but also a smaller student population, so students can come up with their own ideas. One of the things that most impressed me in a conversation I had with her was how she came to us as an applicant with experience in immigration law. She served with a local nonprofit agency dealing with immigration issues. And through those contacts, she came across the opportunity to apply for a grant and do some volunteer work in detention centers. And the center she identified was in South Texas. And it ended up being basically a spring break service project, but the ability to do that project started with her having a conversation with Professor Carpenter. Related to that, if you can incorporate into that, because this took a lot of work on her part, and the question that's being asked by Devin Gear is, how does the workload from clinics differ from regular classes? And so if you could tell a little bit of the background of Amity's experience and the workload associated with clinics.
Sure. So I'll take the workload question first. I think it, as a general matter for both of our law school's clinics, and I think this is true really largely for all clinical opportunities at any law school, it's very important to be very thoughtful and mindful about the semester in which you choose to do a clinic. What's very unique about a clinic experience, unlike an externship or a job, is that in the vast majority of clinical opportunities that are out there at law schools and in both of our clinics, law students are serving in a primary lawyering role with their clients. And so we as instructors put you in a position where you have primary responsibility for your client's case or matter or project. And so that invokes a different level of responsibility than you would have in any other kind of work or educational opportunity. And so you essentially, we ask you to make sure that you can ensure that your responsibilities, your duties, your ethical duties under the rules of professional conduct to your clients come before essentially anything else, right? Just as they would if you were a licensed lawyer engaging in practice. And so it's very important to make sure that you select a clinic semester where you can make space for that. So that you can still meet all of your other educational goals during your time at the law school. The Innocence Clinic is an 8-credit clinic. It's year long, so it's 4 credits per semester. And the Justice Lab Clinic is 6 credits per semester. So it's a very high credit load clinic. In my clinic, students are required to work an average of 20 hours per week, which is how the math works out for a 6-credit clinic. So it's a very intensive obligation, and one that we ask students to take very seriously, and we do a lot of counseling with you on that before you make that decision. In terms of Amitai and this immigration opportunity, so we have a student named Amitai Flores who approached me, gosh, back in the fall, and said that she was interested in trying to pull together a group of students to go down to a detention center near San Antonio to do some brief services and limited advice for folks who were detained there. And so what I offered her, I had access to a little pool of money and was able to give her a little bit of seed funding, and then supported her in getting a grant from the Utah Bar Foundation. And then we worked with her to turn the experience into a credit-bearing externship. And we found there was an adjunct professor who was willing to teach a course in immigration law and working with victims of trauma and interviewing clients to prepare the students for this spring break opportunity to go to the detention center. So the students took a course, and then during spring break, they went down to the detention center. I believe we ended up with 11 students doing that, and worked with an organization there to provide services to detainees, and they received externship credit for that. And so I think, again, this sort of the theme of what I've been talking about during our conversation, I think it's an example of sort of the nimbleness and focus on individual goals and responsiveness to students that really characterizes our law school. So if you want to come here and propose a new externship opportunity and create a new credit-bearing course, I think it's fair to say that we'll be willing to work with you to make it happen.
Hannah Pickett had a follow-up question in regard to, now that the project has been completed for this year, is it going to be an ongoing program offered each year?
So we're still in the process of figuring that out. Speaking for myself and my department, our goal is for it to be an ongoing experience. Although I will add that I think the broader goal is certainly that we wouldn't have folks such a large and elaborate system of immigration detention in the United States. So hopefully the need for those services will go away. But to the extent that the problem persists and there is need, my goal is to find a way for the school to support that and continue that opportunity.
Well, while we have your mic live, there's a follow-up from another candidate, and it goes to the Justice Lab discussion you had. And will a semester's project in the Justice Lab be announced before having to register for the class?
Oh, you guys are so thoughtful and detailed. My goodness. These are the questions that current students are asking me. I'm so impressed. And we're actually in the midst of our application process right now. So I'm literally answering these same students' questions from enrolled 1Ls and 2Ls. So part of the nature of the Justice Lab experience, I always like to say that if you're super duper risk averse, you might not want to sign up for my clinic, because the nature of the clinic is such that I need to know how many students I have enrolled before I can make a commitment to a client organization to represent them for that upcoming semester. And so I need to have students signed up and committed to being a part of the clinic, with the understanding that they'll have a couple of projects to choose from, and they'll be able to select a preference. And normally, it's historically been the case that every student has been placed on their number one choice or second choice project. For whatever reason, it always sort of shakes out that way. But you will not know before you enroll in the Justice Lab what the subject matter is. Broadly speaking, as is probably evident from what I spoke about a little bit earlier, the work that we do is most often relates to efforts to end or alleviate the effects of things like poverty, mental illness, substance abuse. At the end of the day, most of the projects that I've done, I think the vast majority of them, and what I plan to do, have been in some way working on behalf of the most vulnerable members of our community. And so in terms of the substance and overall thrust of the work, that's typically the case.
Okay, great. Melissa Campbell's asking a question about our graduate assistantships and responsibilities in a clinic. So I'll start off with the answer on this one. The question is, would it be difficult to complete both a graduate assistantship and a position in a clinic? Implicit in that question, I think, is in the same semester. And so for the graduate assistantships, those are jobs where you're working in one of our administrative offices, or as a research or graduate assistant with a professor, or assigned to the library doing a variety of kind of project-based research projects. The limits on the graduate assistantship is that you're not to be working more than 10 hours a week. So in terms of your workload, you have to think about, if you're taking kind of that 12 credit hour semester, you're sitting in class for 12 hours. Then you'd have the graduate assistantship responsibility, which is another 10 hours. So you're at 23 hours. And then if you're in one of Professor Carpenter's clinics, which carries about a 20-hour obligation, you're at 43 hours for the week. I think that's doable. You'll find that most attorneys you talk to are saying at minimum they're working 50, 60 hours a week. So that's kind of close to an attorney's workload. But because the clinic hours would be the lion's share of that responsibility, I definitely want to hear Professor Carpenter's opinion on that.
So we have some particular policies that address this, and then can obviously have individual conversations to sort of counsel students on their particular situation, because everybody's sort of capacity to handle workloads is different, depending on what all is going on in our life and our personal obligations and things like that. But as a policy matter, we don't have any prohibitions on doing any kind of graduate research projects while you're enrolled in a clinic. But my clinic in particular does have hour limitations. So I ask students if when they commit to my clinic that they won't be engaged in paid work for more than 10 hours per week. And again, that goes back to what I was talking about trying to make sure that there aren't conflicts between the work that you're doing in the clinic and your duties to your clients and other obligations, trying to head some of that off. And that policy is based on lessons learned the hard way in my prior teaching experience. I also don't allow students to do an externship in the same semester that they take my clinic for the same reason. I don't want to set them up for failure and for problems in conflicts to those different sets of clients. However, the Innocence Clinic, because it's a lower credit clinic, does allow students to do externships in the same semester and doesn't have any kind of policy limitation on paid work while you're enrolled in the clinic.
And I think one of the reasons for that is the externships, depending on the placement and also whether you're doing it during the summer or even the school year, will be work that you're doing in a range of credit hours. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what's the minimum number of credits you're doing for an externship, Professor Carpenter. Is it 2?
No, a student can do an externship for 1 credit. Currently, what that means is that if every credit hour of an externship equals 50 hours of work.
Total work for the semester. Correct. And so you can go from 1, and I've heard, it's fairly common to have students do up to like 6 credits. So you'd want to balance out your placement opportunities with the number of credits you can be earning and what your commitment to that would be. Next question is about international programming. It's kind of a quick one, so I'll take that. It says, are there international study abroad programs available for students? Professor Carpenter talked a bit about the opportunities for doing international clinic or externship placements where you're doing work for course credit. We do not have a formal international study abroad program where you're taking classes in another country, law school classes in another country, but we do have students regularly take advantage of the ABA's policy that says a student, as long as they are attending a study abroad program that is approved by the American Bar Association, can attend that program as a visiting student. And we regularly approve for students, especially during the course of the summer, to participate in other law school study abroad programs as a visiting student and have the credits they earn applied towards their degree requirements here at the law school. The one limitation on that is that those credits are applied toward their degree as pass-fail credits, and we do have a cap on the number of pass-fail credits a student can apply towards their degree requirements. The next question is our last one. We're coming up on the full hour, and I want to leave a minute or so for each of our panelists to have some closing remarks that they like. It's from Hannah Pickett, and it says, can you speak more about the graduate assistantships and the various options for those? I'll answer that question, but I will also acknowledge that I'll be answering or bringing those up as part of the financial aid panel that will be happening next Thursday. But the clinic graduate assistantship and the placements associated with those that program actually are occurring this week. Students apply for those and they are awarded, or placements take place on a competitive basis. The lion's share of those graduate assistantships are with faculty or assigned through the College of Law library, and you're doing what I would call typical research projects with a faculty member. A faculty member may have a book project or a chapter project, or maybe working on an article, and the student serves as their research assistant. In many cases, they'll be doing a variety of things, actually researching case law, maybe researching what kind of sociological or demographic studies are out there as it relates to a project, doing this hard thing called blue booking, where you're checking the citations that the professor has been referring to in that project and making sure the accuracy, both in terms of the style, but also what is being attached to that footnote and what the concept is tied to. And then we also have administrative offices, placements that are associated with your educational experience, which would include our Kids Court program, where there is a law student who works with a pipeline and a service learning project through a Title I middle school here in Salt Lake. We're training the students to participate in the mock trial program, the state mock trial program. So you're teaching these students concepts such as evidence, witness interviewing skills, both in direct and cross-examination, trial procedures, things like that, as well as through our pro bono initiative. We're working with attorneys in the pro bono projects at and our pro bono placement sites where there's intake in various locations around the state. We have not gotten final word, but we have in the past had placements with our Student Affairs Office, and Career Development Office has had placements with some of the graduate assistants. Virtually all the placements are in the law school. This year they number, I think, in the 40 range. That is, we have about 40 students participating in the graduate assistantships. If you'd like some more information, like I said, I'll be addressing that question in our financial aid, or just reach out to me through email or a phone call. We've arrived at the 1:15 hour, so I don't want to take any more of our participants' times or the panelists' times, but I would like if each person would take a minute or so if they have any closing remarks they'd like to make as we get ready to sign off. And if you don't mind, I'll begin with you, Arturo.
Thank you. Well, thanks everyone for making it. And I do hope we'll see you soon. I posted up in the webinar chat with all of the attendees that if you want to talk more about career services, please email myself or Jacqueline Howell in my office. And I also put the link in for the career services site. That's got our emails and our phone numbers. But yeah, flash us an email. I was just on this morning, I was just on the phone with a student for about 45 minutes who'd been referred by Dean Reyes's office over because they had questions about coming to SJQ, and happy to spend that kind of time with you. This is a huge decision, and so please don't hesitate to reach out.
I'll just echo what Arturo just said. Same message from me. I'm pretty easy to find on the Google machine, Anna Carpenter. And feel free to shoot me an email, give me a call, and if I can help you, I will, and I'm happy to spend as much time as necessary to answer your questions, or I will get you in touch with someone who can help you.
Yeah, I'd like to extend the same offer. Feel free to email me with questions regarding your decision. I also want to say that I think a particular strength of SJ Quinney is sort of reflected here, and in particular with CDO, that I really think students get, well, I think that our career services and the related offices do a really great job of sort of individually helping students find the career that they want, sort of placing them. I think career placement in general is a real strength of ours as a school. I think our numbers are really good on that. And I think it's a result of the fact that people care a great deal about sort of placing you in the right spot, and getting clinical experience, getting a good clerkship is part and parcel, I think, of that larger sort of benefit of Utah. I think that's certainly struck me as a real unique thing about this school.
Great. I want to give my personal thanks to Professor Toxin, Carpenter, and Assistant Dean Thompson for their time today, and you, our participants, for your time. We have been recording this panel discussion, so we will post it to the admitted student page, so you'll have access to re-review it. Just a reminder, we will have the student panel on Monday, same time, same bat channel. It'll be a 3L, a 2L, and a 1L. Have a wonderful weekend, all. Please stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you online in a little bit. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tris. Bye, everybody.